Today on the Perception and Action podcast, how should we plan our practices so that we're working on the right things at the right times? Is it better to let our coaching curriculum just emerge? How should we be getting the athletes involved in co-designing practice? So it's time for a call to action. Hi, this is Rob Gray from Arizona State University. I've been on a now over 25-year journey as a researcher, professor, and high-performance consultant to understand how we acquire and adapt our perceptual motor skills. Welcome to the Perception and Action podcast, where I discuss how psychological research can be applied to improving performance, accelerating skill acquisition, and designing technologies. Before we get to today's topic, I want to tell you about a couple extra things that might interest you if you're enjoying the podcast. First, my book, How We Learn to Move, A Revolution in the Way We Coach and Practice Sports Skills, is now available in audiobook format. You can find it on Audible or Amazon. Second, if you're interested in working directly with me, I currently have openings in my monthly mentorship program. This includes monthly Zoom meetings, either one-on-one or with your staff, analysis of your practice designs, and a monthly group discussion with coaches and instructors from a range of different sports. To find out more, please go to patreon.com/perceptionaction. Now on to the show. Hi, everyone. So on today's episode, I wanted to do some more riffing. So thank you, everyone, for the really positive feedback from episode 426. That was the one where I just riffed, had some thoughts about, representative design and kind of the camps within the ecological approach. So I just kind of showed up to the mic and started talking. I had a lot of people express that they really liked that, and they encouraged me to do more of those. So you're saying that it's okay if I come, instead of doing, lots of lit review and reading articles and summarizing them and integrating them all the time, sometimes I can just show up and start talking. Well, as my wife would say, don't threaten me with a good time, right? So I am going to try to do a few more. These are particularly to end out the year. I have some ideas for things I just want to talk off the top of my head, some thoughts I have. Of course, I'm not going to completely abandon the regular type of episodes I do where I research things and bring in articles and things like that. But today I wanted to talk about practice, planning, adapting, and co-designing, right? These are some thoughts that I have watching, coaching myself a little bit and watching other people. A lot of this comes from, interestingly, my experience watching my stepson and my daughter doing pickleball. I think I've talked about this quite a few times. The kind of pickleball training they're doing. I'm going to talk a bit about this. I'm in no way meaning to take shots at the coaches or anyway. They're great coaches and they do a lot of good things, but I'm just kind of had some observations about the type of practice they do, and I want to talk about that. So the first thing I want to do is talk about planning practice, right? So as a coach, I think we have this urge to have a lot of structure to our practice, right? So we know today we're going to work on backhands, and next week we're going to work on forehands, and we have it all plotted out in some sort of spreadsheet or schedule, and we stick to it. Within the individual practice session, we have the activities we want to work on laid out in some nice order. Well, if we're going to really buy into the ecological approach and we're going to really accept the complexity of athletes and the environment, right? I think obviously we want to try to be a bit more adaptable than that, right? We don't want to be too rigid with the plan. We want to try to adapt to what's happening with our athletes and what's happening, on the court and whatever, rather than just being very rigid to a plan of what we want to work on. So we need some structure, but we also need to be able adaptable. So there's a couple things that I've really tried that I really like to do. This is with kids, but I've also used it with older athletes as well. The first one is I call play, afford, play, right? So what I do is I come to practice and I say, okay, we're going to play some games right away. Right. And so, which obviously kids love because they're always used to they're used to playing at the end, right, as a reward. So we play some games. And what I try to do is I walk around and I look and I try to observe, what are people struggling with? What are some of the things we can work on? Right. And, and sometimes I'll actually try to deliberately, if I'm playing against a person or working with a person, I'll deliberately try to pull out a weakness. So what I want is them to experience some weakness they have or something that could be improved, right? So for example, what I saw the other day, in the pickleball example was they were playing a little bit and a lot of the kids were missing serves, right? They were losing points because they were not getting the ball in on the serves. So what happened in the actual practice, so kids are struggling in the serve, and then the game's kind of ended, and then, okay, let's work on backhands now, right? To me, you've missed a real opportunity there for adapting your practice to what's happening on the moment, right? So I want to see what's happening or create this opportunity. Then let's put a practice activity that's going to work on that. Improve your serving ability. So, for example, using analogies to get like a rainbow to get topspin on the ball so it doesn't fly out the end. Using constraints like a hula hoop or different size courts to, so a lot of things you can do. So we're going to play. You're having trouble serving. We're going to practice to constraints approach to work on serving. And then we're going to play again, right? And we're going to let you put what you just learned back into the game, right? So play a forward play. Why do I think that's so effective? Because one of the things I'm really seeing, and I realize as I get more and more, the more that you can motivate self-organization and motor learning, the stronger it is, right? Give your body a reason for wanting to change and find a new movement solution and adapt, right? Other than just telling them, okay, you need to do a back, right? If you can experience on hitting every serve out, force you to explore a new movement solution that gets the ball to be in more. Wow, that is powerful, right? Way more powerful than me just telling you we need to work on this because we need to work on this, right? So letting the design of practice emerge from the practice, right? The interaction of practice. And right, you can't always do this. There's not always something that always jumps out. Sometimes I will do this deliberately in baseball, right? I know the player, what they're struggling with. I'll have a little kind of game where I'll deliberately pitch the ball where I know they have trouble, right? So I've set the stage for working on this thing, right? That they just experienced, and then I let them try to put it back in at the end, right? So getting you to improve, right? Showing you what the weakness is, and then designing a constraint that pushes you towards a solution, then your weakness suddenly improves. Like I said, that's a really, really powerful thing to have, right? So I think that's what I try to do. The other thing I really try to do is when I'm thinking about planning the practices, can I describe what we're going to work on today as an interaction or a relationship, right? So instead of saying we're going to work on backhands, we're going to work on serves, I try to say we're going to work on keeping your opponent deep. We're going to work on moving your opponent around, right? We're going to work on preventing your opponent from smashing the ball at you, right? So interactions, not just techniques. Again, I think that just gets you thinking more ecologically, thinking more about affordances, motivating the player. So these are all the kind of things that, I try to do with adapting practice. A big part of this is really, for me, is just accepting embracing the complexity, right? I think that's a phrase I use in my book, right? If you really accept that the athlete is a complex system, you just have to kind of give up on the idea that you can have these progressive linear changes over practice and this kind of structure, right? And really focus on the moment, right? If you have kids, you know this, like I have this experience with kids, you find this perfect activity where all the kids have fun, at home, and you have this wonderful night, and you try to do it again and it falls flat on its face, right? You can't just have these kind of things are not that simple, right? We're going to build, right? We want to have some structure. We want to pay attention to what's changing, adapt in a logical way, but we have to kind of be reactive. So that's the one thing, being adaptable in practice design, okay? The other thing, with this, really what I see, and when I watch a lot of the really good coaches that I see, and using the constraints-led approach in particular, is not so much about picking a constraint. It's about tweaking and adjusting the constraint, right? So anyone can pick a constraint. Oh, let's have them use a weighted ball, or let's have them use a hurdle to step over. That's part of it, right? You obviously want to pick one you think is valuable. I want to do this small-sided game. It's what do you do next based on what you see. That's a real secret sauce, okay? That's a real secret sauce of using the CLA for me, right? And I like to use this, in the paper I wrote with Carl Woods, where we talked about enskillment. We talked about a coach being a guide. This was this wonderful story by Tim Ingold talking about how his father taught him how to a love of nature, right? Observing nature, bird watching and hiking. And so his father would go out and he wouldn't tell him everything what to do, but he would. So what we want to do is watch what your athlete is watching, right? In a way, right? So you want to see what they're looking at. What are they seeing? What are they picking up? And use that as our guide to design practice. Okay. So that's it. I think being adaptable, knowing how to tweak a constraint based on what you see, I think is a really, really important skill. And it takes, being open to changing things, not having a strict structure. Okay. The other thing couple other things I wanted to talk about is, one of the other things I see in the practice, right, in the pickleball practice, I really like they're really getting a lot of effort to put in co-design, right? And co-design, I'll point out here, I have sometimes people, particularly on social media, where I'll make a comment about a particular practice activity and they'll bash me that, well, you don't know what the coach was trying to achieve. You can't make a judgment about one practice activity out of context. And, there's a certain degree that's true. But I think you can, we know what it's trying to do in most cases. And in this case, I've watched weeks and weeks of practice, so I know what's going on. But anyway, so they're using a lot of good co-design kind of things. One of the things, they let the kids pick the activity for warming up. So they'll take one kid and say, you go around the court and do whatever you want. Jumping jacks, hopping, and the other kids follow and they have super fun and they get all... Unfortunately, they immediately follow that with a bunch of hurdler stretches and, which I don't think are necessary, but after you just did that, but I like that a lot. They also let kids pick the game. So that at the end, they kind of play a game, a fun game, and they let the kids pick it. The unfortunate thing I see in this and a lot of other I go to is the idea is that a game is only something you do for reward for the kid going through all the drills, right? The game can't be really about any learning. It's just for fun, right? And that's fine if that's what you want to do with it. But I think you're really missing an opportunity of using games for learning, right? So, for example, in thinking about design, so one of the games they play in this pickleball is the kids love it. Is called jail. So basically, every kid starts on one side of the court. If you hit the ball out, you have to go to the other side without your paddle. And if you catch the ball out of the air with your hands, then you switch to the people. So the kids love it, except at one point in the game, right after quickly, you have 2 or 3 kids actually hitting the ball with their paddle, and a whole bunch of kids catching the ball with their hands, right? Which obviously is not a skill involved in pickleball. So the idea here, can we, obviously that's fun and so a little bit of that's fine, but can we think of a game like this where they're actually developing skills, right? And we're getting more involved, so that's the kind of thing. Don't think about games just as rewards for drilling. Think about games as tools for learning, right? The last one of these riffs, I think I said the game is not the best teacher, right? But I would say in most cases, a game is the best teacher, right? Coming up with a gamified type of practice activity, I think, is often one of the best ways you can teach it. It doesn't have to be like the actual game, but so that's what I try to do. let's think beyond just rewards, right? Think about, and I said, what I love about this is they let the kids pick which one they want to do. And of course they love that they get the choice. So a lot of great things they're doing in practice. The last thing I wanted to talk about kind of is co-design, right? So I often talk, I present a lot, kind of championing the ecological approach across a lot of sports and a lot of skills. And in a couple of weeks, I'm going to tell you about some of my experiences with that. But one of the things I do notice is, I'll talk about, small-sided games and the advantage of that in soccer and basketball, and I'll go on and that. And then I'll say, what a really fun thing to do is let the kids the athletes pick a constraint, design their own rule. And often I find, particularly as you get up a bit higher levels, that falls completely flat, right? People are like, what? What are you talking about? You want me to let the athletes choose what they're doing? And so, one of the things I think we need to do is think a little more broadly about what we mean by co-design, right? So I think a lot of times when I say that, people think a co-design is just explicit co-design. By that, you mean they get this image of the athletes sitting over their shoulder, looking at their spreadsheet of practice activities and saying, no, I want to do this, let's do that, right? And so being actually saying what they want to do. And that can be part of it, but I think we can also be much more implicit in our co-design, right? So what I'm talking about is instead of just explicitly asking an athlete what they want to work on, what we should practice, use their observation of their playing, their reflections, right, to pull out things, right, to pull out ideas for things we can work on. Just by their comments and the reflections, help use that as a co-designing. So they're helping you design and practice by so it's information, right? Just like an athlete is picking up information, we're picking up information from the athlete, right? That's not all verbal. That's part of it. It's not all explicit. So I think observing what athlete is struggling with, like I said in my play a forward play example, but also, the reflections on, I'm having real trouble because that opponent is really getting to the net quick and I can't get the ball by him, right? There, is a calling out for a specific thing to work on and how we can, we're working on this together. You're giving me your feedback. So I think that is a kind of co-design as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be explicit as we go. Okay. So those are just a few of my thoughts, as I said, on this idea, how we're planning and adapting practice and adjusting it and co-designing it based on our athlete. I think, that's a really, really important part of skill acquisition. Instead of showing up with these, prescribed things we want to work on all the time, I think being adaptable is really, really effective. So that's it for today. This week I'm off to a couple conferences and workshops that I will tell you about next time. So thanks for joining me. Okay, that's it for today's episode. Remember, you can contact me at robgray@asu.edu or follow me on Twitter at ShakyWeights. To find out more about the podcast, please check out perceptionaction.com. Finally, to support the podcast and receive bonus materials, including written transcripts, please head over to patreon.com/perceptionaction. This is Rob Gray from ASU. Cheers for now, and keep 'em coupled.